Today's video is the fourth in a series of videos about my recent cruise on American Serenade through the rivers of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama. And in this episode, the ship is docked in Decatur, Alabama, and we go on a pretty great excursion to the NASA facility in Huntsville. And then the ship takes us to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we visit the Tennessee Aquarium. We follow that up with some great Tennessee BBQ, and for dessert, a visit to Cold Stone Creamery. So it's day 6 of our 7-day cruise on American Serenade, and it's a beautiful morning in Decatur, Alabama. Our ship is docked on the banks of Wheeler Lake along the Tennessee River. The views were really nice from my drone on this beautiful morning. I enjoyed starting the day by flying the drone and taking a look around. The big highlight of the day was a trip to nearby Huntsville, Alabama, to visit the Marshall Space Flight Center, which kids in this part of the country know as the home of Space Camp. We just did not have anything like this when I was a kid. Back in those days, I was camping out in the woods with the Boy Scouts. But these kids are exploring mock-ups of the International Space Station and getting a feel for what it was like to be weightless on a spacewalk to repair something on the outside of the ISS. Of course, the Marshall Space Flight Center features more than just Space Camp. They've got a museum that is right up there with the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of really historic NASA hardware on display here. For example, that right there is the actual command module from Apollo 16, the 1972 mission that put 2 more Americans on the moon. There's astronaut John Young in a memorable photo from Apollo 16. And here's my wife recreating the look. Who wore it better? This is a mock-up of the lunar module that took the astronauts down to the moon's surface and back. And I thought this was very cool. Another mock-up that I assume had been used to train the astronauts back in the day, which allows you to get a feel for what it must have been like to sit in the command module while it was on top of the Saturn V rocket on the launch pad with the Earth's gravity keeping you in your seat. This was a recreation of the walkway that led from the gantry to a Saturn V rocket on the launch pad. And hanging from the ceiling, they had some full-size mock-ups of the big rockets of the Apollo era so that you could see their true size. Watching a launch on TV back in the day, it was hard to tell the real size of the rockets, but standing next to one here at the Marshall Space Flight Center, you could really appreciate the true size of these big rockets. Here's a model of Skylab, America's first space station. A mock-up of the space shuttle's external tanks. Lots of cool stuff to look at. There were some pretty amazing flight simulators that you could experience for yourself. This one looked very interesting. Notice that computer monitor in the lower left that shows you the 2 people inside the simulator, as well as what they're seeing on the screen in front of them. But this one is fairly tame compared to this next one. This is a jet fighter simulation, and these 2 kids are going to get the ride of their life. It turns out that the boy isn't much of a pilot, at least not yet. He has some trouble taking off and trouble trying to control this thing. He and his sister are getting a wild ride. Luckily, the simulator does not actually simulate what happens when you crash a jet fighter. It just kind of skips past the crash and keeps going. So, our excursion to the Marshall Space Flight Center was just really great. I totally enjoyed it. Later in the day, back on board the ship, here's a time-lapse video of our departure from Decatur. The bow drops back into the normal position, and we're sailing again. We're heading up the Tennessee River on the way to our final destination, Chattanooga, Tennessee. I enjoyed this afternoon of sailing up the river a lot. I spent quite a long time just sitting up on the observation deck, taking in all the views. It's always fun to go under bridges, and there were quite a few of those. I guess the highlight is always when the ship comes up to a dam and the ship goes into a lock to raise it up to the level of the lake behind the dam. This is the Guntersville Dam, run by the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the federally owned electric utility that was created by Congress in the 1930s as part of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. Towards the end of the day, the weather deteriorated, and this time-lapse video shows it really well as the storm system moves in from left to right. We were sailing on Lake Guntersville. The wind picked up, and I had to come in from outside, so I watched the storm from the comfort of the lounge at the front of the ship, which has very large picture windows that give a good view of what's going on outside. As you can see, it started raining, and later on we even had some lightning. Look for it just above the hills in 3, 2, 1. Luckily, this all happened in the evening. People were enjoying cocktail hour and dinner and the evening's entertainment, so it didn't put a damper on the day's fun at all. As we approached the Veterans Drive Bridge, taking Highway 35 across the Tennessee River, I want to just mention that if you're interested in booking a cruise with American Cruise Lines, you should feel free to contact my travel agent, Caitlin Gallagher. She's someone I can definitely recommend. She is a certified travel advisor for American Cruise Lines. There's her contact information on the screen. Her services don't cost you anything at all. Her fees are paid for by the cruise line. Visit Caitlin's website to find out more. When I woke up the next morning, we were docked in our final destination, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the weather had improved considerably since the night before. Chattanooga is Tennessee's fourth largest city, with a population of a little less than 200,000 people in the city limits and about 500,000 people in the greater Chattanooga area. Our ship was docked in a perfect location. See those two buildings on the other side of the street just beyond the ship? That is the Tennessee Aquarium, one of the best aquariums in the United States. The building on the right was the first to be built. It opened in 1992 and was a big success right from the start. They added an IMAX theater in 1996, and then the big expansion, that building on the left, opened in 2005. There was so much that I loved about the Tennessee Aquarium. I don't want this video to drag on for too long, so I'm not going to show you everything in the aquarium, but I'll show you some of my favorite parts, like the otters. I just loved watching them play. My wife and I bred Cocker Spaniels for 15 years. Watching otters play is almost as fun as watching a litter of Cocker Spaniel puppies play. This building, the first one they built, is called River Journey, and it's mostly freshwater fish on display here. You'll find the saltwater creatures in the other building next door. The design concept was to follow the path of a raindrop from high in the Appalachian Mountains all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. There were several tanks like this where kids could climb under the tank and pop up in the center of it. And there were several places where you could put your hands in and touch the fish. I find turtles quite fascinating, and I really enjoyed looking at this turtle tank they had. It never really occurred to me that turtles take naps, but yeah, I guess this is how they do it. They just hang onto a branch. Another really great part of the Tennessee Aquarium is the butterfly garden. At home, I love to spend hours and hours in my garden, and this garden here at the aquarium in Chattanooga is like the ultimate garden fantasy. Wouldn't you love to have a garden like this, full of butterflies? And one of my favorite parts of the aquarium was the penguin exhibit. They were a lot of fun to watch. I couldn't help thinking about one of my favorite movies, the 2008 Ryan Reynolds romantic comedy called Definitely Maybe. There's a scene in that movie at the penguin exhibit at an aquarium. Watching these penguins at the Tennessee Aquarium just made me want to watch that movie again. And speaking of movies, we also made it over to the IMAX theater that the aquarium runs, showing nature movies during the day and Hollywood movies in the evenings. So the Tennessee Aquarium was a big hit with me, and after we spent quite a few hours there, we were hungry. So we stopped at Puckett's, a great little casual barbecue restaurant right next to the aquarium, and we enjoyed a big sampler of all sorts of barbecued meats, served with a generous portion of fries. And after that, over to Cold Stone Creamery. We were so happy to see this. They don't have one where we live now, so it was a treat to have Cold Stone ice cream for dessert. That was our day in Chattanooga, and that was our last full day aboard American Serenade after a really enjoyable 7-day cruise on the rivers of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama. And now, over 4 episodes, you've seen the highlights of what we did and saw during this cruise. Click the thumbs up button if you thought I did a good job on this video, and leave me your comments. I'd love to read them. And if you didn't see the previous episodes, I'm putting a link to episode 1 up in the right corner of the screen right now. But I do still have one more video I want to make for you about this cruise. That one will be about the ship, American Serenade. I'll give you a complete top-to-bottom tour of the ship and tell you a little bit about the onboard experience and some things I really like about being on an American Cruise Line's ship. That video should go public on YouTube 1 week after the one you're watching now. I've done 5 cruises now with American Cruise Lines: the Columbia and Snake Rivers, the Mississippi River, Puget Sound, Chesapeake Bay, and this one in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama, plus a Great Lakes cruise with their sister company, Pearl Seas Cruises. And I have another ACL cruise coming up along the coast of Maine. So I think you can definitely consider me a fan of American Cruise Lines. I'm Jim Zim. Thanks for watching.